This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pm-podcast.com or send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. Hello and welcome to episode 181. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast. Nice to have you with us. So, tell me, how often do you as a project manager have to give a presentation? I mean, this could be as simple as addressing your team during a team meeting, maybe facilitate a telephone conference with your customers, giving a formal status update to your sponsors or customers, or even doing a web-based meeting. If I look back at my work as a project manager, I probably had to do this at least 2 to 3 times every single week. And I assume that it's very similar for you as well. That's why I've gone ahead and I've invited Wayne Turmel to the program today. Wayne has been teaching on how you can excel at giving presentations for many years, and he has published several books on the topic. The latest one is called Presentation Tweet: 140 Ways to Present with Impact. The book is full of tweets on improving your presentations. We have selected 12 of these tweets, these tips, for today's interview with Wayne, and he goes much more deeper into each topic. This episode of the Project Management Podcast is sponsored by the PM Exam Simulator, because nothing prepares you more for the PMP exam than being able to sit down and take a realistically simulated PMP exam. Go to freeexamsimulator.com and get your free 3-day access and see for yourself what the PMP exam is like at freeexamsimulator.com. As always, we are giving away 2 copies of Wayne's book in electronic form this time. So if you are interested, please go to facebook.com/pmpodcast and look for the giveaway announcement here for Wayne's book. Leave a comment and, well, you may become the lucky winner. Wayne Turmel is the host of the Cranky Middle Manager Show podcast, and he's the president of GreatWebMeetings.com, which teaches people the presentation skills they need to present, train, and manage your team through online presentation tools like WebEx and the like. He's the author of 2 new books, 10 Steps to Successful Virtual Presentations and Presentation Tweets 01. He is dedicated in helping people learn how to communicate in this crazy world of virtual teams and scattered audiences. He is in Chicago, Illinois. And now, in 140 characters or less, what again makes a good presentation? Enjoy the interview.
Project Management Podcasts Feature Interview. Today with Wayne Turmel, President of GreatWebMeetings.com, the Connected Manager blogger for bnet.com, and host of the Cranky Middle Manager Show.
Hello, Wayne. Welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Cornelius, thank you for having me back, brother.
You recently published a book called Presentation Tweet. Why, and most importantly, how did you write that book?
Well, it was interesting. The publisher, Think Aha, approached me and said, you know, we're doing this series of books with people like Rajesh Sethi and Kevin Eikenberry and all these people. And we're looking for somebody who's an expert in communication skills. And what they had done was they had polled people at Cisco, very technical people, a lot of project managers and people engaged in that end of things. And they had their best practices, and they wanted somebody to kind of put some structure around it and add their own wisdom to it. So I jumped at the chance, partly because I'm a shameless self-promoter and any book with my name on it is good. But more importantly, I have, as longtime listeners of the Cranky Middle Manager know, I've got a real soft spot for technical people. And if I can tell you one little story from my misspent youth that I tell in the book about why that is.
Go for it.
And here it is. And project managers will either be grateful for my empathy or hate me forever. But here's the deal. When I was in about 3rd grade, I did a project with a bunch of other kids. And they spent all night gluing the little dinosaurs into the shoe boxes and putting the diorama together. And I basically did not a whole lot. But when it came time to present it to the class, I was first one on the bus and ready to ride. So I presented it and said, this is a pterodon and this is a brontosaurus and all that good stuff. Well, instantly it became known as Wayne's team. And the poor kids who had spent all night, getting glue all over their hands and putting the dinosaurs in place didn't get nearly as much credit as I did for being the one to communicate the plan. Now, on the one hand, that's awful and terrible, and I should hate myself. On the other hand, it was a pretty important lesson, which is no matter how smart you are or how good at your job, if you cannot effectively communicate what you do, you're not going to get the credit and the advantages and the rewards. So on the one hand, shallow idiots like me get all the credit and that's unfair. But on the other hand, if you really do know what you're talking about and you can communicate effectively, the world is pretty much your oyster. So that was why I was so excited about the project, because these are very smart people, many of whom struggle with getting their projects funded, getting the recognition that they deserve, getting the career advancement that they deserve, because they pay attention to the work and they don't necessarily pay attention to how they communicate it. So does that make sense and ease my conscience just a bit?
Absolutely. Yes, we hereby absolve you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. What will the reader find in and learn from the book?
Well, there are 140 tweets. There's 140 characters in a tweet, so it seemed a nice symmetry. And it's broken up into 4 sections that I think are really key to people, particularly in technical fields. The first is to define and hone your message. The second is what we would think of as delivery skills. The third part is something that we all have to present, and that is obviously very close to what the majority of my experience is, which is presenting online, running virtual meetings and presenting via webinar. And then what's really important for people trying to get their projects funded and getting resources, presenting up and down and across the organization. How does presenting to senior leadership differ from presenting to my peers or to customers? So we took the tweets and we broke them up into those 4 particular areas.
Right. In today's interview, we're going to take a look at 3 of those areas, which is the define and hone your message, deliver your message like a pro, and presenting up and down. And then in the second interview, we're going to jump into the virtual presentations here.
Great.
You opened the book with your introduction with a mention of the hardest lesson that we have to learn. What's that lesson? How can we project managers overcome it?
Well, I think everybody has to learn this lesson when they enter the working world. And our parents did us no favors by telling us that good work speaks for itself. As it turns out, it doesn't. It's lovely evidence for backing up your claims. But good work in and of itself does not necessarily garner you the recognition or the advancement, because somehow you have to appear on people's radar screens, whether they're the bosses that do your performance reviews, whether they are the people who fund your projects, whether they are customers. You need to appear on their radar screen, and you have to be somebody that they want to spend time with and talk with and can add value to their world. And just doing good work, sadly, for most mere mortals, isn't enough. And that is really hard for technical people sometimes to swallow. He's not nearly as good a coder as I am. Why did he get that project?
All right. Let's open up the book and let's take a look at some of the tweets that we find in there, some of the advice that we find in there. It's really more than tweets. It's really good advice in regards to presenting. And I'd appreciate to hear your comments on those tweets, elaborate on them and tell us a little bit about, what you think, why this is important, why this particular advice is in the book. We begin with section 1, define and hone your message, and we go right to tweet number 1, advice number 1. And it says, the purpose of a presentation is rarely just to inform the audience. They need to know, so what?
This is so so important, and it's absolutely fundamental to communication. A lot of people who present data or present findings have worked really hard on their research. And what happens, the number one complaint of people, and if the listeners are honest, they've asked themselves this when they're in the audience. Somebody starts to tell them something, and it's a lot of data, and it's a lot of numbers, and it's a lot of, here's what we found out in our research. And the one thing they want to know is, so what? Why are you telling this? What does this mean to me? If you cannot answer that question, you are probably giving your audience more information than they can handle. And that is by far the number one complaint, particularly about technical presentations. It's the old joke about engineers, people want to know the time, not how to build a watch. It's how quickly can you distill down that so what? Here's the analogy. I was, all appearances to the contrary, a straight A student until about ninth grade algebra. And I asked my teacher, are we ever going to use this in the real world? And my teacher could not give me a satisfactory answer. Well, no surprise. What do you think happened to my algebra marks?
You weren't an A student any longer.
That is putting it mildly, and thank you for your kindness. The point is that people will absorb and pay attention to things that they believe have value to them. If you can't explain to me why what you're doing has value, or you expect me to sit through a long preamble before you make that connection, you're in grave danger of losing your audience. People want to know what's in it for me. Why are you giving me this information? And the sooner you can engage me and hook me and explain why I need to listen, the more likely I am to listen. So before you even start presenting or before you open PowerPoint, you need to sit down and say, I have all this information at my disposal, but so what? What do I expect the audience to do with it once I give them this information? It's so funny when you talk to people and you say, what are you going to, well, I just give a project status update. Why? Why do you give a project status update? Why not just send everybody an email and say everything's good? Well, you want to encourage people. You want to reward those people who've done well. You want to tell that nervous Nelly boss to get off your back. You want to make sure that you have access to the resources. Those are valid reasons for communicating. That's where you add value as a presenter. The data, where everything's fine, we're green light on everything except this piece of it, and we're in amber over here, you could tell somebody that in an email. You don't add any value as the presenter. Where you add the value is connecting it to the audience and engaging them so that they care. They care enough to get off your back and trust you. They care enough to reward you and your team for being on time. They care enough to give you the help you need. That's why you're there.
Talking about the audience, nice little segue, takes me right to the next tweet/advice that I have here. It's number 6. Make sure you've considered all the issues from all angles the audience would approach it from. Then turn their focus on your outcome.
Absolutely. Why does somebody care? And this is really, really true if you're talking across function. A real frustration for a lot of people working cross function is, why don't those weasels in sales get it? This is a very important feature. The reason we're behind this product launch is because we really need to get this right. But if all they want to hear is, when is this going to be available for sale, people are actually incapable of taking in all the other information that you're giving them. It's just so much mwah, 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 mwah. So you need to think about the audience. Audience analysis is absolutely crucial. What do they know coming in? What's their level of experience? Are they positively or negatively disposed to what you're doing? What's their biggest concern? If you can address their biggest concern early and talk them off the ledge, they will give you the mind share to do all the other stuff that you think is important. But if they feel like you're avoiding getting to the point, or you're not addressing what's most important to them, not only do they not pay attention, you could actually be turning them hostile. And anybody who has gone in with reams and reams of data and left frustrated because people didn't understand what they were trying to say could very well be because that wasn't their concern. Discovering the perfect algorithm is not important to them. Knowing when they can bring this to their customers is what matters.
All right. So the first 2 advices that we just heard were focusing on our audience. The third one that I have here goes the other way. That one seems to focus on you and what you want. It is tweet and advice number 13 from your book, and it goes as follows. When you've finished your presentation, what do you want your audience to do? That's your goal.
Really, this is at its simplest, starting with the end in mind. None of us, or at least very few of us, except those of us who like the sound of our own voice, give presentations for fun. Most human beings do not like to present. It's fundamentally ingrained in us. And, I could geek out for a long time on the neuroscience, but the fact is that most people don't enjoy presenting, especially when the stakes are high. Well, if you're going to put yourself through something that you don't particularly want to do, it would be really nice to accomplish our goal, only have to do it once and do it right. What is it you're trying to do? Why are you giving this presentation? And the easiest way to define that is to finish this sentence. When I'm finished my presentation, I want my audience to what? Now, think about that for a moment, because a lot of times people will say, I want them to know where we are with the project. Why? Why is that important information? Why is that worth them stopping their day, leaving what they're doing, and attending a meeting about? What is it you really want them to do? Why should they care? Well, I want them to pick up the pace because we're falling behind. I want them to support my team. I want them to give me the resources I need. That's a reason. And what you've done is not only have you sharpened your focus so that the audience is more likely to quit wondering where this is going, but you've also created the filter for what information goes into this presentation. If it drives me towards that outcome, it's critical information. If it doesn't, it's extraneous, save it for Q&A. Is this information going to help me achieve my specific outcome? Is it going to drive the audience to whatever it is, whatever action I want them to take? That's the filter. By doing that, you will automatically lose a lot of the content that we otherwise throw in by default. The biggest complaint of audiences, especially with technical information, is too much detail. Too much detail. You're killing me.
We're moving on to section 2, where we were right now in define and hone your message here in section 1. And in section 2, we're talking about deliver your message like a pro. And we begin with tweet and advice number 44. Practice doesn't mean flipping through your slides talking to yourself. Practice out loud with the equipment you will use.
We're all busy. We get that. But I am stunned at how many people will put together information for a presentation. They'll take the time. Their project rests on this. How they're perceived inside the company rests on this. Maybe a sale rests on this if they're doing sales support. And yet they always say, I'm too busy to practice. I don't have the time. Our brains are wired to do things the way we've always done them. Practice is critical if you want to identify possible barriers to success, if you want to just know what you're going to say. And so many people just kind of flip through their PowerPoint muttering to themselves, and they consider that rehearsal. Rehearsal includes saying the words out loud so that the words that you use, you can actually say. A lot of times we write things that have too many S's in them, or there's too much alliteration, or I was working with somebody, coaching somebody on a webinar recently, and the words webinar moderator came out webinator. And from that point on, she has been known in her company as the webinator. Some things are just really hard to say. And if you say them out loud and go, boy, that's really awkward, or I don't like the way that sounds, you can fix it before there's a real live audience there on the receiving end. Once it goes out to your audience, it's out there. There's nothing you can do. If you're working with your equipment online, this is so critical. And I know we're going to get into these weeds in a future episode, but 80% of people who present via WebEx or one of those types of tools never rehearse before there's an audience on the other end. If you're stressing about technology, how can you possibly be relaxed and focused on the higher level facilitation and listening and influencing skills if you're worried about which button to push and is the chat feature going to work? You have to take the pressure off yourself. People are scared to death. Presenting creates the same adrenaline and cortisol in your body as 7 cups of coffee. Try doing anything with 7 cups of coffee racing through your system.
Might be a bit difficult.
Rehearsal is absolutely critical, and it's the one thing that we skimp on, and people cheat themselves of the ability to identify barriers to success before they get there. It's the single biggest thing that people don't do that could mean the difference between success and failure.
The next advice and the next tweet here, I'm going to read it out, but I don't want you to say anything to this one. Because what I have noticed in our conversation so far is you are a master at this. And all that you have to do to prove that this is true is just continue doing what you're doing. Here's the advice. It says, learn to be comfortable with silence. Don't feel you have to fill every moment with talking. Silence enhances or emphasizes. And you've been doing that absolutely wonderfully so far. Moving on to tweet and advice number 61. Don't check too often with your boss or your buyer. You look uncertain or needy, and it's creepy. I like that. I just picked that one because of the "and it's creepy" factor.
Well, it's funny. Eye contact is so critical to human beings. We judge so much, especially in Western society. And I grant you that this can be somewhat cultural, but the fact is that if you're working here in Western society, if you are unable to look somebody in the eye, there's a suspicion that at worst you are dishonest and dissembling, at best maybe not real confident in what you're saying. The flip side of that is that when there's an influencer in the room, when there is a decision maker, a senior executive, a buyer, there is a tendency to give all the eye contact to that person and ignore the rest of the people in the room. Or you give very brief eye contact to other people, but you spend a lot of time looking back and your eyes are constantly flicking back to that one person. And it undermines what should be your good intentions, which is to make eye contact and read the responses of your buyer, actually works against you and can make you look a little bit uncertain and shaky. And you want to be careful that you don't cross the line between eye contact and stalking.
Right. Yeah, there are a number of other pieces of advice here in the book that talk about exactly that, how to do the eye contact, how to avoid being a stalker as you make eye contact, but we're not getting into detail with those here. However, number 74 here, I disagree with this one. I frankly do. Let me tell you, listeners, what it is. It is, don't make the microphone do the work. Speak loudly and lower the microphone volume. No, I disagree. I had to give many presentations in front of large audiences, big rooms. I needed to use the microphone. However, I agree that if you are in a smaller setting, you have to stand in front and you have to project, and you don't usually use a microphone. But I cannot 100% be behind this particular advice here, because in my situation, I needed the microphone. What do you think?
Okay. Notice what I said here, which is I'm assuming that you need the microphone. I mean, first of all, if it's a small enough room, the last thing Wayne needs is a microphone. I'm a trained stage performer. My volume is not very often an issue. So if I'm talking about when you do need the microphone, here's why I say this. And a lot of people question this advice, but here's where it comes from. By pushing the volume, just when you're speaking, your energy level goes up. If you have a tendency to speak in a monotone or a quiet, especially men with deep voices, when they speak quietly, their voice flattens out and sounds monotone, which can be very difficult for the audience to maintain focus on. When you push the volume, your voice naturally has highs and lows. Your gestures naturally follow, and you're more animated. Now, if you let the microphone do the work, whether it's a microphone on a conference stage or even on your headset, you're basically amplifying a monotone. The other thing is that when the microphone is up loud, it picks up more background noise. It is subject to more feedback and sounds more hollow. Do a sound check. If you are in one of those rooms, if you're speaking at a conference or if you're in a large room where a microphone is necessary, and I speak at a lot of PMI meetings, and they always get really surprised that I want to be there an hour before to do the sound check. Normally they're begging people to be there in time before they serve the roast beef. I want to be there early because I want to present at a volume that allows me to keep my energy up, that shows the passion in my voice, and still reaches everywhere that it needs to reach. By amplifying your voice without that energy and that passion, you are running the risk of not being as engaging and passionate and exciting as you need to be. And I know that people are talking about technical issues. I had somebody say to me once, I don't gesture, I don't move, I'm an actuary, I only talk about numbers. Well, those numbers have meaning. They're good news or they're bad news. They're scary or they're encouraging or they're something. Volume is intrinsically tied to how you communicate the underlying message of those numbers. If it's just data, we don't need you. We can read a spreadsheet, send us the email and save us the time. Where we add value is interpretation and context and creating that excitement. And that comes from your voice. And if you just speak very quietly and let the microphone do the work for you, you're not doing yourself a service.
Now I can 100% agree with you because I completely misunderstood this advice. I really thought the advice said, basically, don't use a microphone, instead speak up. Instead, what you're saying is, do use a microphone, but don't crank the gain of the microphone up so high that even if you whisper, it comes out loudly out of the loudspeakers. Make it so that you have to speak with a good voice, and that when you speak with that good voice, that the sound that comes out of the speakers can be heard everywhere. That I completely agree with, because what I hate most is when you give somebody a microphone and they hold the microphone down to their belly button and they expect that the microphone will still pick up the sound. Very annoying.
Yeah, and by the way, that speaks to one of the challenges of this book, was that every piece of advice was limited to the tweet format, which is 140 characters. There is very little room for context, or one of the challenges was making the information as clear as we could given the limitations of the format. So that's really interesting that was open to interpretation. And that, by the way, is good advice for people to consider when they're using Twitter, or even when they are text messaging each other, or, it used to be emails were too long. Now they're too short. People don't put enough information in them sometimes. Right. There's no context. So it was really that's an interesting interpretation. And it's something that people need to think about when you communicate, whether it's orally or written. Have I given enough information to be clear?
Right. Did my message arrive at the other end the way I had intended it to arrive? All right. We're skipping section 3 here, the virtual presentations. We're looking at that in our second interview. We're going straight to section 4, present up, down, and across the organization. And I have selected 2 pieces of advice here from that area. Number 119, understand the expectations of peers prior to presenting. Start with common pain points, how a proposal or solution can help address them.
Presenting peer-to-peer is an interesting challenge for a lot of folks. I'm always interested in how many people, when they present, I'm going to use a sports analogy, which I hate doing, but when so many people present, they play defense. They're so worried that there's going to be negative feedback and people are going to hate it, that they front load their presentation trying to anticipate every possible objection and, cut off every possible question in advance. And so they overload their presentation. What's most important to those people? Do they know the history of this project so you can get right to the good stuff? Unlike senior executives, these people are your peers. They probably have context and information. And by the way, are much more interested in the implementation details than a senior executive crowd might be. Take the time, and this goes back to audience analysis, but take the time to understand for this audience what's important to them. What are they going to like? What are they going to have questions about? Because they're your peers, this is probably pretty easy for you. If you're talking engineer to engineer, or as we lovingly like to say, geek to geek, if you're talking geek to geek, what is it they're interested in? What is going to be most important to them? They're interested in how this is going to impact their job. What is this going to mean to me? Giving me the company overview is helpful, but if you can relate it to them, if you can relate it to, remember that project we did last year that ran so badly over budget? We're going to avoid that this time. Now you have my attention. If you can avoid the pain that was inflicted on me last time, I will give you some mind share. Understand who your audience is, and the needs of peers and people who are in implementation but not decision-making functions are different than those who are making the higher level decisions, which I bet leads to the next point.
Exactly. Wonderful segue. Thank you. So this section is about presenting up, down, and across. We have just now heard one piece of advice presenting across, and now the last one, advice number 120, tweet number 120. That one goes in the area of presenting up. Senior management has 3 questions. What's your recommendation? What's it gonna cost? What's the return? Answer them first.
One of the things that drives presenters crazy is I hand them my presentation, I start to speak, and they immediately flip to page 18, which is where the financial information is. Now, is that rude? Possibly. Is that annoying? Definitely. You know why they went to page 18? Because that's the information they care about the most. You have asked your audience to sit through a whole bunch of other information and intentionally avoided getting to the one thing that they want to know about most. Senior executives, by nature, there's a great book called Running with the Big Dogs, which is about presenting upwards in the organization. And the guy who wrote the book, and I am blanking on his name, basically had a rule. Every time you go up a level of the organization, you lose a third of your PowerPoints. And by the time you're in the C-suite, you've got 3 slides. What's your recommendation? What's it going to do for me? What's it going to cost? And you can flip-flop the last 2. But you start with the point. I have a soon-to-be 18-year-old. She is incapable of answering a simple question like, what did you do tonight? Because she will always start with, okay, so when I left, I went to Kelsey's house, and I bet she does everything linearly. All I want to know is, did she leave Kelsey's? Did she go to the movies? What did she see? Did she have a good time? It's a very simple 4-sentence answer. Instead, I get a blow by blow. And by the time she tells me, I don't care what she did. I wish she'd go away again. Senior executives, here's something that people need to hear. The number one complaint of people presenting to senior executives is they don't listen to us. They'd rather go to outside consultants than deal with the very smart people they have internally. It makes us crazy. You know what the number one complaint of senior executives is? People internal to my organization don't give me information I can use in a way I can use it. How can both of those things be true? It's because the answers, and this goes back to the dinosaur diorama, Cornelius, the answers to most of a company's problems sit inside the brains of the people in that company. But if you cannot take what's inside your brain and put it in the brains of the senior executives in a way that they can process and that is useful to them, you may as well not have the answers. And senior executives, by nature of the fact that they are senior executives, have shorter attention spans. They are more eager to get to the point, and they are more desirous of clean answers, which can then be supported by Q&A. Give me the short answer first. If I accept the answer, we're done. We're in and out and we're done. If, in fact, I don't understand the answer or I need more detail, then be prepared to back it up. 2,000 years ago, Aristotle, more than that, Aristotle laid out the rules for making your case, if you will, in rhetoric. He said there are two ways. There's deductive and inductive. Deductive is you follow the clues to a logical conclusion. That's the way most people gather data. Because if you start with the conclusion, then of course you only find out what you expect to find out. So we gather information deductively. Most audiences that you will meet have one question. What's your point? Where are you going? What are you trying to tell me? That's inductive. You start with your hypothesis or your recommendation or your claim, and then you back it up. Once you get used to the idea of gathering information deductively and presenting it inductively, your audience will be much, much more appreciative of what you bring to the table, and senior executives will consider you an asset.
Here's my final question for you. From this book, what's your favorite piece of advice, your favorite tweet, and why is that?
Well, I guess my favorite, and this is really silly, my favorite tweet is no laser pointers ever.
I saw that one.
And there's a smart aleck answer and a actual real reason for this. The smart aleck answer is laser pointers are things that people use because it makes them feel comfortable as a presenter. It gives you something to hold in your hand to control the jitters. It allows you to point out things on the screen in a way that is convenient for the speaker. They annoy the audience. It drives them crazy. Nobody without the touch of a brain surgeon can hold a laser pointer in place so that it actually stays at what you're pointing at. It bounces around and jiggles and makes people crazy. There are plenty of ways to present using pointer-type devices that are much more impactful than a laser pointer, and most of us never have to be that precise. If you're taking somebody through the schematics, a laser pointer might be important. But that kind of precision is seldom important, and by the way, it's never as precise as you think it is. Here's the more meta reason behind that. Everything that you do as a presenter drives towards your desired outcome or detracts from it. Most of what we consider presentation skills, bad presentation skills, are habits that we have developed over the years because they're comfortable and make us feel better as the presenter. They calm our hands, they burn off the nervous energy, they feel more comfortable to us, and that's why we do them. We don't understand the impact that it has on the audience. I've spent 20 years teaching presentation skills to people who essentially don't understand that things like using the laser pointer incorrectly or rubbing your hands together when you talk sends a message of nervousness and maybe lack of confidence that undermines how smart and how right you are. And that makes me crazy. So everything you do as a presenter, from what do I wear to do I use a laser pointer, actually you need to stop and consciously ask yourself, why am I doing this? And does it add value or detract? So on the one hand, just smacking the laser pointer out of people's hands feels really good to me because it is generally a bad habit for people to use them. But if you are going to use it, explain to me why. What's the value? And if you can make a conscious decision, there is no such thing as presenter jail. There is no absolute right or absolute wrong. There's only, does it get you closer to the desired outcome or does it keep you from getting there? And that's what I want you to think about when you're presenting.
There was one time when I was attending a presentation when I saw laser pointers used to their full potential. And here's what they did. And you're probably going to love this one. I walked into this presentation. It was a huge room. It was a PMI meeting. There were 200-300 people attending. I walked in the door as a participant, and I was handed a laser pointer. And so was everybody else. So there were 200-300 people in that room, and everybody had a laser pointer. The presenter didn't. What we had to do is we had to vote with the laser pointers. So we were sitting there and he was asking questions and we could go, yes, no at the screen. And it was interesting. It was interesting to see some people were pointing like at the ceiling and the floor. It was very difficult because there were so many of these points. But it was a very great way, an excellent way of getting instant feedback from your audience in the room. And everybody was participating. It was a very good presentation, very well done. And that's what I would say, if you don't use a laser pointer, that's perfect. Instead, give the laser pointer to your audience. They have more fun with it, and it's more interesting anyway. All right. So once again, the book is called Presentation Tweet: 140 Ways to Present with Impact. It is written by Wayne Turmel, and it is published by Think Aha Books. Wayne, thanks for being on the program today.
Thank you for the chance, man.
And that was Wayne Turmel with tips and tricks on improving your presentations. Don't forget, if you would like to win a copy of Wayne's book, then please go to facebook.com/PM podcast, look for the book giveaway, and simply leave a comment. The winners, by the way, are now all announced on Facebook as well, and we no longer mention them here on the podcast itself. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. And if you're a PMP or a PGMP and you're looking for a simple and effective way to earn your PDUs, then try our sister podcast, the PDU Podcast. Get a new webinar and at least one new PDU every month, completely on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Man is so obsessed with his need for success that project disasters are usually just filed away. Until next time,